3rd of July, 1941. Pre-dawn shrapnel scallops the tank hull as glass and dust drift. Alexei Kravchenko stands under the crane hooks, factory director turned evacuation lead, reading the wartime order that makes him answer for every bolt and every person. He commits. The entire plant will go east to the Urals whole. To keep tanks rolling for the Red Army, he must lift a small city onto rails. 40,000 workers, 10,000 machines, 800 rail cars, while raids continue and the lines break without warning. He starts with a load list and a chalk mark on the floor, choosing which lathes to unbolt before sunrise, because the goal is fixed and the clock is strict. Full production again in 33 days. He reads the order twice and holds it steady on the desk, so his hands do not show strain. Delay means the enemy will take the machines that shape steel to war and use them or deny them. He fixes one goal in his mind that will not move. The plant must restart in the Urals fast enough to feed today's fights, not the ones drawn on maps for next year. That goal sets every other choice. He keeps a narrow line running, welders and fitters under a roof patched with tar paper, so tanks still roll today while the rest of the building begins to empty around them. He lays out a triage that loaders can follow without a question. Crates get color tags by criticality. Red for jigs, dies, gauge blocks, masters. Yellow for machine tools and fixtures. Green for stock that can wait. The tags are big, brushed on with house paint and nailed to slats so they can be seen from 10 paces in dust. A red tag means no hesitation, not for rank, not for a friend's belongings. He checks the first line of crates himself and moves 2 yellow tag boxes to green, because the goal is speed on the things that cannot be replaced. He knows heavy presses can be rebuilt slowly, but a lost die face is a dead end. He walks the tool room with the foreman and points to what leaves first. The die sets for turret rings, the broaches for gear teeth, the gauge blocks that keep tolerances honest. He orders the design office to duplicate the full drawing sets and patterns. One set goes into a sealed metal case with the drafting chief. Another is split across separate consignments, wrapped in oil paper and tucked into different cars. This sweats the staff because it means extra work under blackout, but he cannot allow a single point loss. He puts a load master in each hall, men who can say yes or no and make it stick. They report to one rail liaison at the end of the turbine room. That liaison steps into his office each hour on the hour with a notebook and departure numbers, and if a report is late, he wants to know why. He walks to the commissariat and asks for night loading. It is not a request so much as a trade. He will clear his cars at the times he promises, therefore the dispatcher will not hold them in the open under a moon. The blackout rules mean lantern cones and muffled orders, but it will cut the eyes in the sky. He writes out a simple set of machine handling rules and posts them by the doors. Drain oils and coolants. Remove belts and handles, lock spindles with wood blocks, bind tables to their beds. Crate to the car, not the machine. Skids cut to the rail car deck. Braces nailed to the sidewalls, shock under the feet. He has seen a planed bed twist a hair out of true and cost 3 days of scraping to bring back. That time does not exist now. So he puts a fitter at each loading ramp with a level and a feeler gauge to check that nothing leaves his sight already wounded. He takes the payroll and breaks it into machine families: turret lathes, mills, key seaters, press crews, heat treatment hands. For each family he names a nucleus, a portable core that can seat a new line at the far end. He writes names and backups onto worn cards and places them into envelopes marked for the first trains. He accepts their families onto the same manifests. Beds and blankets go in with the gauges and the small fixtures. It costs space that a press might have taken, but he has seen men vanish when asked to leave their children behind, and he will not bleed skills at the station. He walks the dorms and offices and says it plain: bring what you can lift. The rest will be replaced by work. A bomb tears through the marshalling yard before noon and leaves cars canted like toys. He does not go to the crater because his job is not there. He shifts the plan to dispersed sidings he marked on a paper map 2 days ago for this case. Trains will be made in 3 places now, small and fast, not one big target. Telephones die under the same blast, so he sends runners with slips and uses the field radio on his desk for confirmations. The handset smells like warm dust and oil. He keeps the messages short. Car counts, siding names, times. If a number is wrong, he walks there. He changes the way wood is cut. He orders pre-cut pallets in 2 sizes and crate frames in 3. It turns loaders into assemblers instead of carpenters, and time per car falls at once. He stands at the ramp and sees it happen. A machine rolled, bolted, boxed, and lifted in minutes instead of an hour. With that gain in hand, he goes back to the rail office to secure a block of departure windows. He promises to clear each consist at the exact minute on the ledger. He gets his windows. He knows the price if he misses one. A train that lags becomes a torch. On his desk sits a broad ledger with pencil columns: car number, contents by tag and plain words, destination siding in the east yard, escort name. He writes in the numbers himself at first to fix the form, and then hands the work to a clerk with neat script. Each page means a piece of the plant that can be reassembled in order. He reserves cars for heat treatment furnaces and the quenches that serve them, even though they are heavy and awkward, because a good plate needs a proper bath, and the front needs good plates, not brittle ones. Space runs short faster than he wants. Castings sit in rows with rain on them. He makes the cut he has been turning in his mind, and leaves behind non-critical castings that can be poured again in the Urals. He calls his foreman close and frames the risk without drama. If the dies are lost, there will be no tanks. Therefore the dies go first and are watched. The faces he sees are tired but set. He adds his own name to the first departure list and writes the car numbers under it. He will ride with the first consist to the sidings to the east, because pressure travels with a man in charge, and because the real work begins where the cars stop. He orders the departures in echelons so each train can stand alone if cut off. A slice means tools, a roster of operators, spares, and the drawings that match them. He checks the rosters against machine families before a break is released. If a turret lathe crew is short, the train waits. He sets tool cars in the middle of each consist, where splinters and strafing find them less, and he puts families into coaches at the rear so the first hits will not take them. Before the first whistle, he has escorts chalk car numbers on both sides of every car in thick hand, so a scorched panel will not erase an identity. Because blackout rules turn stations into blind shapes, he writes paper signal codes that can be passed hand to hand. Each conductor carries a card with the day's symbol and color mark, and each station master has the key to match it. A hooded lantern can be kept dark while a hand checks paper under a coat, so no one waves a light for aircraft. He drills crews on uncoupling without lamps, counts steps from the brake wheel, hands low, voice down, chain slack, pin up. He watches them do it once, then twice, because a wrong reach in darkness breaks fingers and clocks. To pull eyes from the real flow, he sets a decoy consist of scrap plate and empty crates on a public schedule at noon. It is loud and easy to see and goes in a straight line. He does not need to know if the planes look at it. He needs his true trains to be elsewhere when they do. He rides the lead locomotive cab of the first echelon because route calls cannot wait on wires that may die. The cab is hot, the glass smears with soot, and the conductor's notebook sits on the sill. When the first junction shows a tail of cars in both directions, he steps down and walks to the office. The clerk behind the counter has priority codes on a board. He reconsigns 2 of his trains under a higher code, signs with his war order number, and takes the risk into his pocket. The queue breaks around them. He notes the time and the cars, because he will have to answer for this. Back in the cab, he tells the conductor to clear on the right-hand spur where the sleepers are newer. It shaves minutes and means the tool cars do not sit in the open. He has ordered a maintenance crew into a baggage car in the second train. Jacks, timbers, wedges, a chain puller, spare bolts and rope. Loads shift when brakes slam on grades and a shifted load eats a train. Mid-route, a flat car groans and sprays at an axle box. A bearing has gone. He sends the baggage car forward, and the men pull a bearing from a scrapped wagon left in a weeded siding. They jack one car, steal from the other, and swap metal in the grit beside the rail while the engineer keeps steam up. It is ugly and fast, but the train holds its place in the slot he promised. He writes the field fix into his notebook with the car number, so the replacement can be proper at the depot. Ahead, a bridge approach is cratered, and a line of men with picks looks too small against the hole. He stands with the conductor over the map and takes a northern loop that adds hours. He chooses it because the rails there run under trees and because no work crew can promise a repair before dark. The added time hurts, but a collapsed bridge would cost more. He calls the station ahead and leaves a short message in the clear. Loop, north, coal at quarter. As trains stack behind him, he sends word back to split heavy presses across the next departures. No single train will carry a whole process step now. If steel leaves the track, the dies that shape turret rings will still exist on another line. Telegraph traffic falls apart the next day. A substation is hit and lines hum with static and then go quiet. He walks platform to office at each stop and asks for the station master's ink log. The entries are simple: time, car count, marks chalked on sides. He pages from town to see what has passed and what has not, and he builds the real picture against his plan. Chalk on both sides proves its worth when one side of a car arrives blackened and unreadable. He copies numbers into his own small book by coal light in the cab, and he writes down the reasons he changes things, because he will need these patterns again, and because someone will ask why he took what he took. A day raid finds a siding and lays 3 cars open. He smells hot varnish and dry grain, and he sees a tool chest blown apart like kindling. He does not stop to count. He sends the escorts to the fire edge and tells them to pull the heat-treated dies first. A die face can be remade, but not in the same time as a crate of spares, and not without a reference. They use shirts as mitts and pass the heavy faces into a safer car, then push the burning remains away from the rest of the string. When the smoke thins, he has the surviving loads rebalanced. The tool cars go back to the center, families go back to the tail, and the decoy, still on its clock, is sent again to make noise where he is not. Coal and water are tight at an intermediate depot. The rule says requisition papers, but time says trade. He opens a crate of spare bearings and a box of hand tools and lays them on the platform. The depot chief looks once at the rails and once at the grease in the bearing and nods. Tanks need coal more than a back room needs spares today, and the tools will keep some other line from stopping. He sees hunger slow hands on couplers and tongs at the next stop, so he goes to the grain warehouse and signs for flour with his order number. Field kitchens go up by the water tower on iron sheets and bricks. Bread and porridge appear. Work speeds at once. He knows he is spending favors he does not have, but he also knows dead time compounds like interest. He keeps the standing order in place for every departure. No train leaves without a roster of skilled operators per machine family aboard. A press is useless without its hands. He walks a coach at night and checks the names against his cards. He is not looking for comfort. He is looking for the fitters marked as seeds. If one is missing, he moves a man from a later train forward and marks the change. In the cab, when the coal slumps to a red eye, he writes in his notebook what was moved and why. This is not to justify himself later to a tribunal. It is to make the next decision faster when the same shape appears in a different place. The ridge line ahead shows different rock, and the conductors call the next dispatch district by another name. As they cross into the Urals zone, he wires ahead to the receiving yards and the new halls. Allocate floor space by process flow, not by origin hall, the message reads in his neat hand. Turret rings with their broaches and gauges to one run, plates and heat to another, engines to a third. He adds the arrival order by train number so dock crews can pull what they need first. He knows that speed will come from straight lines on the floor, not from nostalgia for how the old plant looked. He pockets the stub of pencil, feels the heat of the cab iron through his coat, and watches the trees change. The trains do not look like hope. They look like work that will be ready when the doors in the east open. He steps into the new halls and sees rails, walls, and a roof that keeps most of the snow out. The floor is open concrete with chalk dust, no lines, no machines, only a few power stubs under tin caps. The yard has turnouts and a coal pile, but no cranes are rigged. He calls the local works to him and folds them into his own rosters under one line of march. There will be no old plant and new plant, only one chain of orders. He posts a single board for names and shifts and has foreman exchange lists in front of that board so loyalties cross at once. The yard boss from here gets the same window as his own rail liaison. Command is the same voice, therefore confusion has no place to grow. He takes a piece of chalk and draws a path down the center bay, an arrow that runs one way only. Raw plate will come through one door, hulls will leave another, nothing will cross against the flow. Each station will face the arrow, not the wall. He lays machines by process time, not by the rooms they knew before. Long cycle work sits where floor is thick and ventilated. Short cycle steps slide to the edges to feed the line without travel. He walks the tape from shear to press to weld to fit. A straight path shortens waiting and hides less time in piles on the floor. He writes the order on a card and pins it by the door. Plate, form, weld, machine, fit, test. The first machines arrive before the grid is stable. He does not wait. He orders a boiler crew to run temporary steam and a dynamo off the siding. The dynamo hums and throws light into two bays while the city power staggers. He has lathes leveled by taut wire and spirit levels because the precision blocks are still on the line behind him. A line under tension and a bubble in glass are enough to work true within a hair, so he accepts that and moves on. Presses land on green concrete. He slides wedge plates under their feet and draws them down light, knowing they will have to be regrouted later. The choice is simple: cut steel today and pay the rework cost later, or waste days that the front does not have. Winter air scrubs the halls clean and cruel. Dust from coal and grit from boots move faster in the dry wind. He sets oilcloth tents over open bearings and tells the oilers to make rounds with small cans. Each tent gets a tag and a time. He opens a canteen along the path so a man does not have to leave the line to eat. Bread, soup, tea in metal cups. Families arrive with the second trains and spread blankets on tank hulls between shifts. He sees a child's hand on cold plate and asks the fitters to stack hulls with space between so people can sleep in out of the draft. He assigns a quality inspector to each zone. The rule is one pass at the end of the cell, then move. No hovering and no stopping a station twice for the same fault. Speed comes from clear work and clear checks. A crate that should hold a forging die arrives empty but for straw and a broken strap. He counts his options and chooses a welded subassembly to stand in for the missing ring piece. He calls the welding lead and the designer, and they revise the routing card with a thick pencil line. The change locks when the card is stamped, so there is no drift. It costs more weld and heat and later machining, but it saves the days a new die would take. He moves 2 men from press to weld and brings in an extra test to check distortion before fit. At final, he builds a rework loop into the floor plan. If a fault shows at assembly, the part goes back 1 bay, not all the way to raw machining. The loop sits under a crane with tools, gauges, and a bench that never moves. New hands keep arriving from the west. Many have never seen this line. He prints simple job cards with 3 verbs per task: fit, pin, torque. Align, drill, deburr. The cards are big enough to read with a hand lamp. He posts a board with hour-by-hour targets for each cell. When a cell misses a time, he walks there. He does not ask why first. He looks for the block and moves it himself if he can. He pulls a bin of bolts from stores when he sees empty bins. He cuts a slot in a guard when a wrench catches. He reserves 1 crane for line recovery only and writes that rule on the jib in paint. No one uses it to save a step. When a hull sticks on skids, That crane rolls, lifts, and clears. Flow is worth more than one more load moved. A fire starts in a paint booth when a blower clogs with lint. The air shifts and he smells solvent before the alarm. He halts finishing for 2 hours, doors open and sand down, and keeps machining, weld, and fit on their pace. He pulls painters into prep and masking while the booth is cleaned and ducting replaced, so their hands stay in rhythm. When the smoke thins, he staggers booth load to catch up without starving final. In the yard, he tests the first engine at dusk because smoke columns show a story by day. The run-up shakes the ground. He watches the manifold glow dull and then dark, and signs off on the timing by lamp light. If a guard is going to see anything, it will be the last drift of heat in the cold. He stands by the gauge frame when the first hull rolls to measure. The numbers are close enough to sit inside the marks. It is not perfect. There are edges that will need a second pass. He authorizes serial production under heightened checks for the first week. If the checks hold and the rework loop stays short, the pace will climb without a drop in fit. He writes the serial decision into his notebook with the hour beside it, because decisions are real when recorded and the ledger keeps him honest. He has the tool room cut gauge flags to hang on parts that pass, so there is no argument on the floor. He sees the line begin to behave like a straight thing. Parts arrive to stations when they should. Racks fill and empty in order. The canteen bell rings between shifts, not during them. The dynamo still carries more than the grid on some nights, but the lights do not die. He moves the wedge plates under 2 presses when the concrete sets, and he does it between trains so the floor keeps its rhythm. He watches a loader stop before the reserved crane and step back without asking. The rule has settled into hands, which means it will hold when he is not at that bay. On the 33rd day, a full train takes tanks and spares out of the east gate. The couplers close, and the brake test clicks down the string. He notes the consist number and the hour in the same notebook that holds his first chalk list. The yardmen look down the rails and then back to their work, because the next train must be made. He knows the paint still smells of new, and some welds will show their first temper under cold. He also knows the front counts by arrival, not by effort. The train moves, therefore the Army's line can stand where it stood yesterday. He fixes a daily rhythm. Trains will leave at the same hours, tied to rail slots that feed the forward supply echelons. He puts those hours on a single board by the yard door and writes them into one dispatch ledger that now does 2 jobs at once: production release and rail sign-off. The station master stamps 1 page, not 2, and the cars roll. If a cell slips, the ledger shows at once what slot will be missed, so he can pull crews forward or split a consist. The rhythm moves pressure from guessing to time. He stations 3 expediters with real authority. 1 at the foundry, 1 in machining, 1 in assembly. Their orders are simple. Fix shortages at the source, not at the end of the line. The expediters walk, not phone. The foundry man checks heats against tomorrow's press plan and swaps pours on the floor if a mold breaks. The machining man floats cutters and taps where they are needed before a station goes dry. The assembly man watches bins, not clipboards, and pulls from spares when a rack is late. Each writes in the same dispatch ledger when they change a routing, so the yard clerk sees the effect in minutes, not a day later. Because shortages are handled where they start, the cadence holds. Because the cadence holds, the rail windows are met. When a slot opens early, he slides a partly loaded train into it for engines alone. Missing a window is not a single delay. It means a gap where the army expects a crate. Returns begin to arrive with soot and notes tied to handles. He opens a repair bay by the yard gate with its own crane and test stand. A tank that can be fixed faster than it can be built is treated like gold. He lays out a triage: runners in 6 hours, runners in 2 days, write-offs to strip. Engines are measured on a bench with a set of known good pumps and magnetos, and bad parts are replaced before the hull rolls again. He changes packaging so track pins, filters, and belts ride inside hulls and turrets, lashed to eyelets. It cuts the number of separate cars that would have carried the same weight, and it means the right spares arrive in the same place as the machine. He fixes 1 train day each week to nothing but engines and spares. The front calls them lifters. He calls them insurance. He pares the product down to 2 variants that share the same heart of parts. He writes a short order that removes small differences that have long tails, bracket shapes, unique fasteners, odd hose runs. He keeps the angles that keep shots out and the thickness that saves crews. He authorizes modest armor simplifications on non-critical faces. Leave mill marks rather than chasing finish. Cut chamfers only where a seal needs it. Machine a boss in 1 pass rather than 3. He sets a hard check after heat and a plate test in the yard. The plates hold. In the same week, he opens a training cell by the repair bay. Field mechanics arrive with each outbound train for a day and a night. They strip, fit, and time on cutaway modules until they can do it in the dark. They ride back with the trains they will keep alive. He restructures shifts into 3 shorter blocks. 6 hours, handover on the hour, then away. He shows the crews the numbers a week later. Night rework tags fall. Scratched bores and missed torque flags fall. The count of good hulls at final grows, even though the same hands spend fewer hours per day on the floor. He sees the last hour of the old long shift had been the most expensive. With shorter blocks he needs more changeovers, so he writes a fixed handover routine on a card at each cell. Tools are laid in the same places, gauges zeroed. The next crew signs the card before the first bolt turns. Because hands are less tired, the line stops less. Because the line stops less, the cadence tightens. A telegram arrives with thanks. He reads it once and files it under the day's ledger, then adds another departure to the plan because thanks do not change the count at the front. Trains do. Inspectors come in heavy coats. He walks them through the cells. He points to gauge frames, scrap bins with tagged reasons, and the graphs on the wall that show defects by station. He says little. The numbers are plain. An order follows that names the plant a strategic asset. Guards change posts, and the rail office gets a priority code. He answers by adding a second line in the next bay, not a mirror but a copy that skims waste learned from the first. The arrow on the floor is straighter. The wedge plates under presses are set before grouting. The second line borrows nothing from the first except rules. He tracks the field's destruction reports against his own shipping ledger. Case counts on paper from the front are rough and late, but a pattern shows. For 2 weeks the lines are near each other. Then his daily departures rise above the reported losses and stay there. Requests change from bursts stamped urgent to lists that cover a week with serials, locations, and spares sets. He cannot see the front. He hears it in the way telegraph clerks speak and in the shape of the orders. Units ask for engines at fixed intervals and pins by crate count, not handfuls. He moves his spares train day from the end of the week to the middle to match the new rhythm. Because needs are planned, his trains stop being surprises and start being answers. The line settles into a steady thing. Daily departures meet the set windows without the yard calling twice. The repair bay returns faster than a new hull can be started. The training cell runs on its own time. The inspectors return and walk the same route. He points to the same places. The numbers are better. He writes less in his notebook now because more is written in paint on jib arms and on cards by the cells. Each fix he made is a line someone else can follow. Each line followed becomes a habit. Habits become throughput, and throughput becomes trains. He keeps the notebook anyway. It sits in his coat, and when a new shape appears, he draws a line to an old one and decides faster. He stands at the yard once more and watches two lines push hulls to the same gate. Engines sit ready on flats for the weekly spares train, and crates inside the hulls rattle against pins and filters as the cars couple. The cadence he set now lives in other hands and other watches. He does not know the crews who will step into these tanks. He knows they will receive machines that start, spares that fit, and a schedule they can count on. The trains move. Therefore the front that he cannot see holds ground he will never step on. The factory he carried east now beats like a clock, and the clock drowns the rate at which the enemy breaks steel. The plant remains in the Urals, its halls shaped by choices made under fire. As barracks rise and families leave the bays, the rhythm they set endures. He has learned that speed comes from clarity. Simple flows, single accountability, visible numbers. Because he moved everything in one push and held to that line, departures rise above losses and stay there. He cannot see the front, but trains leave on time with machines that start and spares that fit, and the ground holds. The decision he made in a bomb-lit hall becomes a clock that does not stop, and that clock helps bend the war's line.